I was sitting in my home office when the doorbell rang at 9 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in January, which should have been my first warning that something ridiculous was about to happen. My name is Kevin Quinlan, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates community in Westchester County, New York, for about 5 years. The development was one of those planned communities that looked like it came straight out of a catalog, with perfectly manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and street names that all sounded vaguely British, despite being built on what used to be a working farm in the 1990s. I worked from home as a software consultant, which meant I had the luxury of avoiding the commute into Manhattan and the misfortune of being home for every single HOA busybody who decided to make their rounds during business hours. When I opened the door, there stood Patricia Danielson, the HOA president, holding her ever-present clipboard and wearing that pinched expression that suggested she had just discovered someone had painted their front door the wrong shade of beige. Patricia was 53 years old, had hair that defied the laws of physics with the amount of hairspray she used, and seemed to believe that her position as HOA president was roughly equivalent to being the mayor of a small European principality. "Mr. Quinlan," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need to discuss a serious violation with you." I leaned against the doorframe, already tired of this conversation. "What violation would that be, Patricia?" She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "It has come to the board's attention that you have been receiving commercial fuel deliveries to your property." I blinked at her. "You mean the propane deliveries for my backup generators?" "Commercial vehicles," she said, emphasizing each syllable like she was teaching a toddler new words. "The HOA covenant clearly states that commercial vehicles are not permitted on residential driveways for extended periods. It creates an unsightly appearance and diminishes property values." "The truck is here for maybe 20 minutes while they fill the tanks," I said, feeling my patience already wearing thin. "Once every 3 months." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nevertheless, it is a violation. Several neighbors have complained about the noise and the appearance of having what amounts to an industrial operation in a residential neighborhood." "An industrial operation? It's a propane delivery. People get heating oil delivered all the time." "That's different," Patricia said, though she did not elaborate on how. "The board has voted and we are implementing a new policy effective immediately. No commercial fuel deliveries are permitted within Meadowbrook Estates. You will need to make alternative arrangements for whatever it is you are doing with all that propane." I straightened up, my relaxed posture evaporating. "What I'm doing with the propane is running backup generators for my home office. I have servers and equipment that need to stay operational during power outages. We lose power at least 3 or 4 times a winter up here. Then I suggest you look into battery backup systems like normal people use," Patricia said. "The policy is effective immediately. If we see any fuel delivery trucks on your property after today, you will be fined $500 per incident." "You cannot be serious." "I assure you, Mr. Quinlan, the board is entirely serious about maintaining the aesthetic standards of this community. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV, which was parked in front of my house at an angle that blocked half the street. I stood in the doorway for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then I went inside and immediately pulled up the HOA covenant documents on my computer. I had read them when I bought the house, but like most people, I had skimmed the boring parts. Now, I read every word about commercial vehicles. The clause she was referencing was clearly meant to prevent people from running businesses out of their homes with constant truck traffic or parking work vehicles in their driveways. It said nothing specifically about periodic deliveries. By Patricia's interpretation, we would not be allowed to have furniture delivered or get our septic tanks pumped. I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had handled my house closing. He listened to my story and sighed. Technically, HOAs have pretty broad authority to interpret their own covenants, Marcus said. But this sounds like a selective enforcement issue. Are they stopping everyone's heating oil deliveries? Propane deliveries for people with gas grills? Where's the line? That's what I want to know. Here's what you do. Send a certified letter to the HOA board requesting clarification on the policy and asking for examples of how it will be uniformly enforced. Document everything. If they fine you, we can fight it, but you might end up spending more on legal fees than the fine itself. So basically, I'm screwed. Welcome to HOA living, Marcus said. I'll draft the letter for you. I spent the rest of the day fuming and researching alternative solutions. My backup power setup was not trivial. I had 2 large propane-powered generators that could run my entire house for about 2 weeks on a full tank. They powered my server racks, my workstations, the refrigerators, and the heating system. I had invested nearly $30,000 in the system after a particularly bad ice storm 5 years ago had knocked out power for 11 days. I had lost a week of work, thousands of dollars in spoiled food, and nearly froze in my own house. The battery backup systems Patricia had mentioned so dismissively would cost even more than my generator setup and would not provide nearly as much runtime. And where exactly did she think the power to charge those batteries would come from during an extended outage? Over the next week, I sent my certified letter and received a response that was basically a form letter restating the policy with no actual answers to my questions. I called an HOA board meeting to address the issue in person, which was my right as a homeowner. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, a building that was supposed to be available for resident use, but somehow was always booked whenever you actually wanted to use it. The room had about 30 people in it, which was a pretty good turnout for an HOA meeting. Most of them were there for other issues, like the ongoing debate about whether the community pool should be heated or whether dogs should be allowed off-leash in the common areas. When my agenda item came up, I stood and addressed the board, which consisted of Patricia, the Vice President Roger Morrison, the Treasurer Linda Wu, and 2 at-large members whose names I could never remember. I'm here to discuss the new commercial vehicle policy, I said. Specifically, how it applies to fuel deliveries for residential use. Patricia looked down at me from the raised platform where the board sat like it was a judicial bench. We have already communicated the policy to you, Mr. Quinlan. What exactly is unclear? Everything, I said. For starters, are you banning all fuel deliveries? Heating oil, propane for grills, that sort of thing? The policy addresses extended commercial vehicle presence, Patricia said. Quick deliveries of reasonable household fuels are acceptable. What you are doing exceeds reasonable household use. How so? I use propane to power backup generators. Other people use heating oil to heat their homes. Both are fuels delivered by commercial trucks. What's the difference? Roger Morrison leaned forward. The difference, Mr. Quinlan, is the scale. You have industrial-sized propane tanks on your property. Multiple neighbors have expressed concern about the safety implications of having what amounts to a bomb in a residential neighborhood. That was new. Now it was a safety issue, not just an aesthetic one. The goalposts were moving. Those tanks are installed to code, I said. I had permits from the county. They were inspected and approved. If you have safety concerns, you're welcome to have the fire marshal come take a look. I'm confident they'll find everything in order." "Nevertheless," Patricia said, "the board has determined that the scale of your fuel storage exceeds what is appropriate for a residential setting. The policy stands, and if I refuse to comply, then you will be fined according to the schedule outlined in our previous correspondence. Continued violation can result in a lien being placed on your property." I looked around the room at the other homeowners. A few looked sympathetic. Most looked bored. Nobody spoke up in my defense. I sat down, defeated for the moment but not done fighting. After the meeting, I approached a few of the sympathetic-looking residents and found that several of them had their own grievances with Patricia's board. Apparently, she had been on a crusade to elevate the standards of Meadowbrook Estates for the past year, which mostly meant finding new and creative ways to fine people for minor infractions. One couple had been fined for having solar panels that were visible from the street. Another guy had been threatened with daily fines because his grass was allegedly 2 inches taller than the HOA standard during a summer drought when there were watering restrictions in place. It was an impressive display of bureaucratic overreach. But knowing I was not alone did not solve my immediate problem. My propane tanks were about half full, which meant I had maybe a week or two of runtime if we lost power. And this being January in New York, power outages were practically guaranteed. We were in the middle of a cold snap, with temperatures hovering around 15 degrees during the day and dropping below 0 at night. I decided to test the policy. I called my propane supplier and scheduled a delivery for the following Tuesday. When the truck showed up, I watched from my window as it pulled into my driveway. The driver, a guy named Eddie whom I had gotten to know over the years, hopped out and started connecting the hoses to my tanks. The truck was there for maybe 25 minutes total. Eddie and I chatted about the weather while the propane flowed. He disconnected, and he drove away. The whole thing was completely routine and unremarkable. The fine notice arrived in my mailbox 3 days later. $500 for violation of the commercial vehicle policy. There was a grainy photo attached, clearly taken from across the street with a telephoto lens, showing the propane truck in my driveway. Someone had been watching for this. I paid the fine under protest and had Marcus file an appeal with the board. The appeal was denied within 48 hours with no explanation beyond "the board has reviewed your appeal and finds no grounds for reversal of the fine." Fine. If they wanted to play it that way, I would let my tanks run down and deal with power outages the old-fashioned way, by being cold and miserable like everyone else. I was not going to pay $500 every 3 months just to heat my house and keep my equipment running. February arrived with a vengeance. We got hit with a nor'easter that dumped 18 inches of snow on us in 24 hours, followed by an ice storm that coated everything in a thick layer of frozen precipitation. Tree branches started snapping under the weight of the ice, and on a Friday afternoon, I heard the distinctive sound of a transformer exploding somewhere in the neighborhood. The lights in my house flickered and died. I looked out the window and saw that every house on the street was dark. The power was out. I fired up my generators within 5 minutes. They roared to life, burning through my dwindling propane supply but keeping my house warm and my equipment running. Through my window, I could see my neighbors' houses sitting dark and cold. Street lights were out. The whole neighborhood was dead except for my place. I figured the power would come back on within a few hours like it usually did. But hours turned into a day, and the power was still out. I checked the utility company's website on my phone and saw that thousands of customers were without power across the county. Trees had come down on power lines all over the place. Crews were working around the clock, but the conditions were dangerous and repairs were slow. By Saturday evening, my generators had been running for over 24 hours. I checked the propane gauge and felt my stomach drop. I was down to about a quarter tank. At this rate, I had maybe 3 more days of fuel, and there was no way the power was coming back that fast. The utility company's estimate for our area was now showing 5 to 7 days for restoration. And thanks to Patricia's brilliant policy, I could not get more fuel delivered without paying a $500 fine. I bundled up in my warmest coat and walked outside to survey the neighborhood. The temperature had dropped to about 5 degrees, and the wind made it feel much colder. Every house was dark except mine. I could see people through windows, huddled under blankets, using flashlights and candles for light. I was walking past the Miller house when Tom Miller opened his front door and called out to me. "Hey, Kevin, you got power, generators," I called back. "Still running on propane. Man, you're lucky. It's freezing in here. We're about to pack up and go to Linda's mother's house in Connecticut." "At least she has power." "Stay safe," I said. I walked further down the street and ran into other neighbors who were all dealing with the outage in various ways. Some had fireplaces and were burning wood. Others were running small portable generators that powered a few lights and maybe a space heater, but not much else. These generators ran on gasoline, and several people mentioned that they were running low on fuel, and the gas stations were either closed due to lack of power or had long lines. When I got back to my house, I found Patricia Danielson standing on my front porch. She was bundled up in an expensive-looking down coat and had clearly not been without power for long because her hair was still perfect. "Mr. Quinlan," she said as I approached, "I hope this power outage finds you well." That was a weird thing to say. "I'm managing. What can I do for you, Patricia? Actually, I was hoping you might be able to help the community." She smiled, which was somehow more unsettling than her usual scowl. "I see your generators are still running. How much fuel do you have left?" I was immediately suspicious. "Why do you ask?" "Well, several board members are without power, and we were thinking that perhaps we could relocate some of our essential HOA operations to your home until power is restored. We would need to run some computers, printers, that sort of thing, and of course it would be warmer for conducting necessary business." I stared at her. "You want to use my generators, the generators you tried to force me to get rid of." "I would not phrase it quite that way," Patricia said. "We simply implemented a reasonable policy about commercial vehicles, but in an emergency like this, the community needs to come together." "The community," I repeated. "Let me make sure I understand." "You banned my fuel deliveries, threatened to put a lien on my house and fine me $500. Now you want to benefit from the generators I kept running despite your policy. There is no need to be petty, Mr. Quinlan. This is about the greater good." "The greater good?" I shook my head. "No, Patricia. You cannot use my generators. I have limited fuel and I need it for my own house and my work equipment. Thanks to your policy, I cannot get more fuel delivered." Her expression hardened. "I see. So you are willing to let your neighbors suffer out of spite." "This has nothing to do with spite. This is about you creating a problem and now expecting me to solve it for you. Where are you staying, by the way? Your house looked pretty dark when I walked past." "I have arrangements," she said stiffly, "but other board members are not so fortunate." "Then they should have thought about that before voting to ban my fuel deliveries. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to conserve the fuel I have left." I walked past her and unlocked my front door. "This is not over, Mr. Quinlan," Patricia called after me. "The board will hear about your refusal to cooperate with the community." I went inside and closed the door, standing in the warm hallway of my house and trying to process what had just happened. The sheer audacity of coming to my house and asking to use the generators she had tried to ban was breathtaking. But as I settled back into my office chair, I started to feel a little guilty. Not about Patricia, she could freeze for all I cared, but about my other neighbors who were genuinely suffering through this outage through no fault of their own. People with kids, elderly people, families who could not afford to just pack up and go to a hotel. I spent the evening doing some calculations. If I was careful about what I ran and when, I could probably stretch my remaining propane for another 4 or 5 days. But that assumed the power came back on in that time frame. If it took longer, I would be in the same boat as everyone else, sitting in a freezing house in the middle of winter. The next morning, Sunday, I woke up to someone pounding on my door. When I opened it, I found Roger Morrison, the HOA vice president, standing there with 2 other people I recognized as board members. "Kevin," Roger said, "we need to talk." I let them in, mostly because it was brutally cold outside and I was not going to make anyone stand on my porch regardless of my feelings about the HOA. They stood in my entryway, looking around at my well-lit, warm house like it was a miracle. "Coffee," I offered, mostly out of habit. "That would be wonderful," Roger said. I made coffee while they settled around my kitchen table. When everyone had a mug, Roger got down to business. "Look, I know Patricia came by yesterday and I know it did not go well. I am not here to rehash that. I am here to ask for your help as one neighbor to another." "I'm listening," I said. "We have a problem. Several families in the community are in genuine distress. The Johnsons have a 6-month-old baby and no heat. The Patels have an elderly father with medical equipment that needs power. There are at least a dozen households that are approaching dangerous conditions." "What about the community clubhouse?" I asked. "Does not that have backup power?" Roger shook his head. "We have one small generator that can run some lights and maybe a microwave, but it is not set up to provide heat or power for multiple families. And it is almost out of fuel too. We have been trying to get propane delivered, but the suppliers are slammed with emergency calls, and even if they could come, Patricia admitted that we would be violating our own policy." I sipped my coffee and let that sink in. "So you are starting to see the problem with the policy?" "Yes," Roger said. "We screwed up. I voted for that policy because Patricia convinced us it was about maintaining property values and I did not think through the implications. Now we have homeowners at risk and our hands are tied. What do you want from me?" "We want to temporarily suspend the commercial vehicle policy for the duration of the emergency," Roger said. "But we need a majority board vote to do that, and Patricia is refusing. She says suspending the policy sets a bad precedent and that people need to learn to be better prepared." One of the other board members, a woman named Susan something, spoke up. "She is at her daughter's house in New Jersey. She has power and heat. She is not dealing with any of this." "So what's the plan?" I asked. "We need to call an emergency board meeting and override her," Roger said. "But we also need to document why we are doing it. If you let us use your generators to set up a warming center here, it would show that we are responding to a genuine community emergency. And it might shame Patricia into actually doing something productive." I thought about it. My house was large enough to accommodate people. I had a finished basement with a separate entrance that could work as a warming area. And maybe, just maybe, this whole disaster would finally force the board to repeal their stupid policy. "Fine," I said. "But I want the vehicle policy repealed entirely, not just suspended, and I want it in writing." "Done," Roger said. "We will call the emergency meeting for this afternoon. Can we start bringing people over? Give me a couple of hours to set things up." They left and I got to work. I moved furniture around in my basement to create a common area with seating. I set up some space heaters, plugged them into my generator circuits, and made sure I had enough extension cords to go around. I also did some more careful calculations on my fuel. If I was going to be heating the basement and providing power for multiple families, my remaining propane was going to run out even faster. Around noon, people started arriving. The Johnsons came first with their baby, who was bundled up in so many layers he looked like a tiny marshmallow. Mrs. Patel came with her father, who needed oxygen equipment that I helped them plug in. More families trickled in throughout the afternoon, grateful for the warmth and light. My house became a sort of community center. People brought food to share, and we got a rotation going where families could charge phones, warm up, get hot meals, and then rotate out so others could have space. I ran power strips down to the basement and set up a laptop so kids could watch movies. Adults sat around talking, sharing information about the outage and discussing the HOA situation. By evening, word had spread through the neighborhood, and more people kept showing up. My fuel gauge was dropping faster than I wanted, but watching families warm up and seeing the relief on people's faces made it hard to turn anyone away. Roger came back around 5 with the other board members, minus Patricia. We held the emergency meeting via phone, Roger announced to the room. The commercial vehicle policy has been suspended indefinitely pending a full review and revision. Kevin, you are authorized to have your fuel tanks filled at HOA expense as an emergency measure. People in the basement actually clapped. I called my propane supplier and explained the situation. Eddie, my usual delivery driver, said he would try to get to me tomorrow but could not promise anything because they were overwhelmed with emergency calls. That night, I barely slept. I was constantly checking the generator gauges, monitoring the propane levels, and making sure all the families in my house were comfortable. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a noise outside and looked out to see Patricia's Lexus pulling up to my house. She got out and marched up to my door. I met her on the porch. I heard what Roger did, she said. Her perfect hair was slightly mussed, which told me she had probably driven through the night from New Jersey. He exceeded his authority. The board cannot suspend a policy without proper notice and a formal vote at a scheduled meeting. Pretty sure emergency powers allow for exactly that, I said. And you can take it up with the board tomorrow. Right now, I have families in my house who need help, and I am not going to stand here arguing with you about parliamentary procedure. This is ridiculous, Patricia said. You are turning your house into a shelter because people were not prepared. That is not the HOA's responsibility. People were not prepared because you banned the exact thing that would have helped them prepare, I said. Do you not see that? All I see is you trying to make yourself into some kind of hero while undermining the board's authority. Mark my words, Mr. Quinlan, there will be consequences for this. She stomped back to her car and drove off. I went back inside, too tired to even process what she had said. Monday morning brought no power restoration, and my propane was now critically low. I had maybe 12 hours of fuel left at the rate we were burning through it. Eddie called around 8 to say he was 3 stops away and would be at my house by noon. At 10, Patricia showed up again, this time with a county sheriff's deputy. I opened the door to find them both on my porch. Mr. Quinlan, the deputy said, I am Deputy Martinez. I have received a complaint about an unauthorized shelter operation on this property. Can you tell me what is going on here? I explained the situation, the power outage, the HOA policy, and how we were trying to help families in need. Deputy Martinez listened carefully and then asked to see the basement where people were staying. I showed him around. Families were sitting together, kids were playing board games, and everything was orderly and safe. The deputy talked to a few people, confirmed they were there voluntarily, and then came back upstairs. "Madam," he said to Patricia, "I do not see any violations here. Mr. Quinlan is voluntarily allowing his neighbors to use his home during an emergency. That is not illegal. But he is operating a shelter without proper permits or inspections," Patricia insisted. "This is not a shelter," Deputy Martinez said. "This is a private residence where the owner is allowing guests during an emergency. If you want to pursue code enforcement issues, that is between you and the town, but there is no criminal matter here." Patricia's face turned red. "So you are just going to allow this?" "Madam, we have actual emergencies to deal with. People trapped without heat, medical emergencies, that sort of thing. I am not going to waste time on a neighborhood dispute." He turned to me. "Sir, you are doing a good thing here. Keep it up." After they left, Roger called to tell me that Patricia was threatening to sue both me and the rest of the board for insubordination, breach of duty, and about a dozen other things. None of it would go anywhere, he assured me, but it showed how out of touch she was. Eddie arrived just before noon with his propane truck. He backed into my driveway, and several of my neighbors actually came outside to watch, like the fuel delivery was a parade. Eddie got out and started the fill process. "Heard you are doing a good thing here," he said. "Just trying to help," I said. "Well, this one is on the house. My boss said any emergency fills during the outage are covered by our community service fund. You are helping people, so we are helping you." I could have hugged him. The propane flowed into my tanks, filling them back up to capacity. I had fuel security again, at least for a couple of weeks. But as Eddie was finishing up, Patricia's Lexus came screaming down the street. She screeched to a stop behind the propane truck, blocking it in, and jumped out. "This is a violation," she shouted. "I am photographing this and you will be fined." Eddie looked at me. "Is she serious?" Unfortunately, Patricia was taking photos with her phone, documenting the truck, my tanks, everything. Eddie calmly disconnected his equipment and walked over to her. "Madam, I am going to need you to move your vehicle so I can leave. Not until I have documented this violation of community standards. Madam, you are blocking a commercial vehicle from leaving, which is actually illegal. Move your car or I will call the sheriff's department." Patricia's face went through several shades of red before she finally got back in her Lexus and moved it just enough for Eddie to squeeze past. He shook his head as he climbed into his truck. "Good luck with that one," he said, and drove off. I went back inside to find several of my guests had watched the whole thing from the windows. Mrs. Johnson, the woman with the 6-month-old, looked horrified. "Is she going to cause problems for you?" she asked. "Probably," I said. "But do not worry about it. You all just focus on staying warm." The power finally came back on Tuesday afternoon, nearly 4 days after it had gone out. The lights flickered on, and everyone in my basement cheered. Families started packing up to go back to their own homes, thanking me repeatedly for helping them. By Tuesday evening, my house was empty again, and I finally had time to assess the situation. I had helped probably 20 families over the course of the outage. My propane tanks were 3/4 full thanks to Eddie, and Patricia was presumably preparing whatever revenge she had in mind. The revenge came in the form of a certified letter on Thursday. It was a fine notice for $3,000, itemized as 6 separate violations, $500 each. One fine for the propane delivery on Tuesday, when I tested the policy weeks ago. 5 more fines for each day you operated a commercial warming center on residential property in violation of HOA covenants regarding business operations. I called Marcus immediately. "This is insane," I said after reading him the notice. "She is fining me for helping people during an emergency." "She is also overreaching badly," Marcus said. Let me handle this. Do not respond to her directly. Forward me everything and I will draft a response. Friday afternoon, I got a call from Roger. There is going to be a special HOA meeting on Saturday, he said. You need to be there. Several of us are putting forward a motion to recall Patricia from the board and to permanently repeal the commercial vehicle policy. Can you actually do that? If we get enough homeowner signatures on the recall petition, yes. And trust me, after what she pulled during the outage, we have plenty of signatures. Saturday's meeting was packed. The clubhouse was standing room only with homeowners who had turned out to have their say. Patricia sat at the board table looking defiant, but I noticed she did not make eye contact with anyone. Roger called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the recall motion. He had a petition with signatures from over 60% of the community homeowners, more than enough to force a recall vote under the HOA bylaws. Patricia tried to argue that the petition was improperly filed and that the whole thing was a witch hunt orchestrated by people who wanted to flout community standards. But nobody was buying it. One by one, homeowners stood up to speak. Mrs. Johnson talked about how I had provided a warm place for her baby when her house was dangerously cold. Mr. Patel talked about how the oxygen equipment for his father had stayed running thanks to my generators. A dozen other families shared similar stories. Then people started talking about other grievances with Patricia's leadership. The solar panel fines, the grass height citations during a drought, the arbitrary enforcement of rules that seemed designed more to generate fine revenue than to actually help the community. When it came time to vote on the recall, it was not even close. Patricia was removed from the board by a vote of 83 to 12. She stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out of the clubhouse without a word. The meeting continued with the election of a new board president. Roger won easily, and then moved to the commercial vehicle policy. The vote to permanently repeal it was unanimous among the remaining board members. Roger also announced that all fines issued to me related to the propane deliveries and the warming center operation were being rescinded, and the board was issuing a formal apology for the way the situation had been handled. I stood up when Roger asked if I wanted to say anything. I just want to say that I think this community pulled together when it mattered, I said. And I hope we have learned something about the difference between rules that help people and rules that just make life harder for no good reason. People clapped, and the meeting wrapped up. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. On Monday, I got a call from Deputy Martinez, the sheriff's deputy who had come to my house during the outage. Mr. Quinlan, I wanted to give you a heads up about something, he said. Patricia Danielson has filed a police report claiming that you stole HOA funds by accepting unauthorized propane delivery at HOA expense. What? Roger authorized that delivery as an emergency measure. I know, Deputy Martinez said. We spoke to him. He showed us the board meeting minutes. The report is not going anywhere, but I wanted you to be aware that she is trying to escalate things. Is she going to face any consequences for filing a false report? Probably not. It is a gray area, and we generally do not prosecute unless there is clear malicious intent. But between you and me, she is making herself look pretty foolish. The next escalation came on Wednesday when I received a lawsuit notice. Patricia was suing me personally for defamation, claiming I had orchestrated a campaign to damage her reputation and interfere with her duties as HOA president. Marcus looked over the lawsuit and actually laughed. This is one of the weakest cases I have seen in years, he said. She has no evidence of defamation, and truth is an absolute defense anyway. Everything you said about her actions was documented fact. We will file a motion to dismiss, and I will be stunned if it gets past that stage. Should I countersue? I asked. We could, but honestly, she is digging her own grave here. Let's just focus on getting this dismissed. The motion to dismiss was filed, and we got a court date set for early March. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Estates was actually getting better. Roger's new board was implementing common sense policies, removing a bunch of the petty restrictions that Patricia had put in place, and generally trying to make the community more livable. I had my propane tanks filled again in February without incident. No fines, no complaints, no HOA board members showing up to take photos. It was gloriously boring. The court hearing for Patricia's lawsuit arrived on a cold March morning. Marcus and I showed up at the Westchester County Courthouse and found Patricia there with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in a slightly rumpled suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The judge, an older woman named Judge Helena Pierce, reviewed the case file and then looked at Patricia's lawyer. Counselor, this seems like an HOA dispute that should have been handled internally. Why are we here? Patricia's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client believes that Mr. Quinlan engaged in a coordinated campaign to defame her and cause her removal from the HOA board. And your evidence for this coordinated campaign. Mr. Quinlan operated an unauthorized shelter in violation of HOA rules and used that as a platform to turn board members and homeowners against my client. Judge Pierce looked at the case file again. It says here that Mr. Quinlan provided emergency shelter to neighbors during a prolonged power outage in the middle of winter. That is your evidence of defamation. He violated HOA policies to do so. Was anyone harmed? My client's reputation was harmed. Judge Pierce took off her reading glasses and looked directly at Patricia. Madam, did you or did you not implement a policy banning propane deliveries to Mr. Quinlan's home before this power outage? Patricia stood up. Yes, Your Honor, but that was to maintain community standards. And when the power went out, and Mr. Quinlan was one of the few people with backup power, did you ask to use his generators? The community needed help. So you banned his fuel deliveries, but then wanted to benefit from the generators those deliveries supported. Patricia did not answer. And then, if I am reading this correctly, you fined him for providing shelter to families with young children and medical needs during an emergency. He was operating a business without proper authorization. A business? Judge Pierce looked at Marcus. Counselor, did your client charge any money for this shelter operation? No, Your Honor, Marcus said. Everything was provided free of charge to neighbors in need. Judge Pierce looked back at Patricia's lawyer. I am dismissing this case with prejudice. Your client has no standing, no evidence of defamation, and frankly, I am borderline offended that this case was filed at all. Mr. Quinlan's attorney, do you wish to file for sanctions or attorney's fees? Marcus stood up. Your Honor, we request attorney's fees in the amount of $4,200, representing the time spent defending against this frivolous lawsuit. Granted. Miss Danielson, you are ordered to pay Mr. Quinlan's attorney fees within 30 days. This case is dismissed. Patricia's face went white. She started to say something, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook his head. They left the courtroom quickly. Marcus and I walked out into the hallway, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That went well, I said. About as well as it could have, Marcus agreed. She will have to pay the fees, and having a case dismissed with prejudice means she cannot refile. You are done with her. But I was not quite done. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I got a call from Deputy Martinez again. Mr. Quinlan, I wanted to let you know that we are investigating Patricia Danielson for possible theft from the HOA. What happened? After she was removed from the board, the new treasurer started auditing the HOA finances. They found several irregularities. It looks like Patricia may have been using HOA funds for personal expenses. We are talking thousands of dollars over the past couple of years. I guess I should not be surprised, I said. There will probably be charges filed. I just wanted to keep you in the loop since you were involved in the whole situation. The charges came in mid-April. Patricia was charged with theft and misappropriation of funds. According to the news reports, she had been using the HOA credit card for personal shopping trips, spa days, and even a vacation to Florida that she had claimed was for an HOA conference that did not exist. The total amount she had stolen was just over $18,000. It was enough to make the charges a felony. Her case wound through the court system over the following months. I was called to testify at one point about the HOA policies and the timeline of events during the power outage, but mostly I stayed out of it. In September, Patricia pleaded guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for paying full restitution to the HOA, serving 200 hours of community service and 2 years of probation. No jail time, but her reputation in the community was destroyed. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates had returned to a new normal. Roger's board was doing a good job of managing things sensibly. The commercial vehicle policy was gone, replaced with reasonable guidelines that prevented actual problems, like people running junk yards while allowing normal deliveries and services. I got my propane delivered every 3 months without incident. No fines, no drama, no HOA presidents showing up to take photos. The fuel truck would come, Eddie would fill the tanks, we would chat for a few minutes and he would leave. It was boring and perfect. The community actually came together in other ways too. After the power outage experience, several other families invested in backup generators. The HOA even installed a larger generator at the clubhouse with enough capacity to serve as a genuine warming center if we ever had another extended outage. I also got to know my neighbors better after having them in my house during the emergency. The Johnsons invited me over for dinner several times. Mr. Patel and I played chess together on weekends. There was a sense of community that had not existed before, when everyone was too worried about HOA violations to actually talk to each other. By the time winter rolled around again, a full year after the power outage, I found myself actually happy to be living in Meadowbrook Estates. The HOA was functioning the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing rules that made sense, without the petty tyranny that Patricia had brought to the role. I was sitting in my office on a cold January morning, exactly 1 year after Patricia had first showed up at my door to tell me about the commercial vehicle policy, when I saw Eddie's propane truck pull into my driveway. I went outside to meet him. The temperature was around 20 degrees and there was snow on the ground, but the sky was clear and bright. "Regular delivery," Eddie said as he got out of the truck. "Looks like you are running at about half capacity. Should get you topped off no problem." "Sounds good," I said. We stood there while the propane flowed, talking about nothing in particular. Eddie mentioned that he had gotten several new customers in Meadowbrook Estates over the past year, all people getting backup generators installed. "You started a trend," he said. "People realized that being prepared makes sense." "Well, we learned that lesson the hard way," I said. As Eddie was finishing up and disconnecting his equipment, Roger walked by with his dog. He waved and came over. "Morning, Kevin, getting your delivery?" "Yep, all set for another few months." "Good deal. Hey, we are having a community barbecue at the clubhouse next weekend if you want to come. Just a casual thing, trying to keep people connected after last winter." "I will be there," I said. Eddie drove off. Roger continued his walk, and I went back inside my warm house. I sat down at my computer and got back to work, secure in the knowledge that if the power went out, I would be fine. And more importantly, my neighbors would be fine too. The whole experience had taught me something about the nature of rules and community. Rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. When someone starts using rules as a weapon or a way to exert control, it stops being about community and starts being about power. Patricia had learned that lesson the expensive way, with legal fees, criminal charges, and a destroyed reputation. The rest of us had learned it by seeing what happens when common sense gets thrown out in favor of rigid adherence to policies that do not make sense. And in the end, Meadowbrook Estates was a better place for it. We had reasonable rules, competent leadership, and neighbors who actually cared about each other. The HOA served its purpose without making everyone's life miserable in the process. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, Kevin, just closing out the last of the paperwork from the Danielson case. Patricia made her final payment on the attorney fees yesterday. You are officially done with the whole thing." "That is great news," I said. "You know, in all my years practicing law, I have never seen an HOA situation quite that dramatic. You should write a book or something." "Maybe someday," I said. "Right now, I am just enjoying the peace and quiet," and that was the truth. After a year of fighting with the HOA, dealing with lawsuits, and managing a neighborhood emergency, peace and quiet sounded pretty good. I spent the rest of the day working on a software project for a client, with my generators sitting silent in the basement, my propane tanks full, and my house warm and comfortable. Outside, the winter sun shone on the snow-covered lawns of Meadowbrook Estates, and everything was exactly as it should be. Later that evening, I got an email from the new HOA board. They were proposing a new policy to recognize community members who had gone above and beyond to help their neighbors. They wanted to give me some kind of award at the next community meeting. I wrote back and politely declined. I did not need an award for doing what anyone should do, helping people who needed help. The real reward was living in a community where that kind of help was appreciated rather than punished, where the HOA worked for the residents instead of against them. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard the wind pick up outside. Weather reports were calling for another winter storm, possibly another nor'easter like the one from last year. But this time, I was not worried. My generators were in perfect working order, my propane tanks were full, and if the power went out, I could help my neighbors again without fear of fines or retribution. The HOA had my back instead of breathing down my neck. I slept well that night, and when I woke up the next morning to find that the storm had bypassed us and the power had stayed on, I felt almost disappointed that I had not gotten a chance to test the new community emergency plan. But that was okay. There would be other storms, other emergencies, other chances to prove that a community could work together when it chose to. And Meadowbrook Estates had chosen to. Spring arrived with the usual thaw and mud season. The HOA's new board continued to make improvements, removing more of Patricia's restrictive policies and implementing programs that actually helped residents. They started a community garden on one of the common areas. They organized a neighborhood watch program that was actually about safety, rather than spying on people for violations. They even hired a new management company that focused on maintaining the property, rather than generating fine revenue. I kept working from home, consulting on software projects and living my quiet life. The propane truck came and went according to schedule. My generators sat ready in the basement, properly maintained and fueled, a silent guardian against the next inevitable power outage. And the best part was that it was all completely unremarkable. No drama, no conflict, no HOA president treating her position like a personal fiefdom. Just a normal neighborhood where people lived their lives, followed reasonable rules, and helped each other when needed. That was all I had wanted from the beginning. And thanks to one disastrous power outage and a community finally standing up to an out-of-control HOA president, that was exactly what I got. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show people what really matters. For Meadowbrook Estates, that crisis was a winter power outage that exposed the difference between rules that served the community and rules that served only the ego of one person in charge. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way, with legal judgments, criminal charges, and the complete loss of the authority she had wielded so carelessly. The rest of us had learned it by watching what happened when someone finally said no to unreasonable policies and put people's welfare ahead of appearances. As I sat in my office that spring day, looking out at the greening lawns and the neighbors walking their dogs, I realized that this whole experience had changed how I viewed community living. It was not about perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. It was about people taking care of each other even when, especially when, that care required bending or breaking rules that did not make sense. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Johnson. She was inviting me to her son's first birthday party the next weekend. The baby I had helped keep warm during that power outage was turning 1, and his family wanted to celebrate with the community that had helped them through a scary time. I texted back that I would be there, and I meant it. These were my people now, not because we lived in the same planned community with matching mailboxes, but because we had been through something together and come out better for it. The sun was setting over Meadowbrook Estates, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow Eddie would come with another propane delivery. Roger would continue doing a good job as HOA president, and life would go on in its beautifully boring way. And somewhere out there, Patricia was probably still bitter about how everything had turned out, still convinced that she had been right and everyone else had been wrong. But that was her problem now, not ours. We had a community to build, one reasonable rule and one helpful gesture at a time. And I was proud to be part of it, propane tanks and all.